The president tweeted his response to North Korean's foreign minister's address to the United Nations on Saturday. The president said, quote, "Just heard foreign minister of North Korea speak at UN. If he echoes thoughts of little rocket man, they won't be around much longer." That in response to that blistering tirade by the North Korea's foreign minister, Ri Hong-yo, saying that comments like this by the president make a nuclear strike against the U.S., he said, inevitable.
What else could be a bigger threat than the violent remarks such as pouring fire and fury, total destruction coming from the top authority of the world's biggest nuclear power?
And there's a wave from the president as he comes down the steps of Air Force One. So, of course, certainly on his mind and on his mind of John Kelly and others, the defense secretary and the secretary of state, is what should we do about North Korea, especially when faced with that type of comment from the foreign minister. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Waltz is with us. He's a retired Green Beret commander, former counterterrorism advisor to Vice President Cheney, and author of Warrior Diplomat and a Fox News contributor. You know, Mike, we just heard the foreign minister say that a strike, in his words, is inevitable. Yeah. You know, is that really true? Is it just more bluster? You know, because we hear this type of bluster from them all the time.
Well, Eric, I'm hearing a lot of concern out there that the president's tough talk is actually escalating the situation, and there's a lot of folks that are scared, and there's a lot of concern that, you know, his kind of rhetoric is not helping our diplomacy and not helping the economic sanctions and other efforts that we're trying to put in place. But, you know, I have a different view. A crisis right now with North Korea on its current trajectory is guaranteed. We are not going to accept, and this president is not going to accept, nor should he, a nuclear-armed North Korea that can blackmail our allies and the United States. And so I think it's going to take this type of rhetoric and this type of tough talk to make them believe, North Korea and China especially, that we will not accept it, that we will take military action if we have to. And only then, I think, will the status quo of the last 40 years be shaken up enough so that these other efforts can take hold. You know, one of the things that I think
others, though, are saying, though, that, you know, this could backfire. I mean, you talk about take military action. Yeah. You know, they could kill hundreds of thousands or millions in Seoul before we can wipe out all of their arsenal and their artillery.
Oh, that's right. And don't get me wrong. We are walking a fine line, and the president's walking a fine line here, and the military option absolutely has to be the last resort. But my point is the credible use of military force actually helps diplomacy and actually helps the enforcement of the economic sanctions. And it's only when China especially believes that that is a very real option under this president, that he absolutely will not accept North Korea with a nuclear program, will they begin to move. And that's why I believe you've seen the Chinese just now tell their entire banking system to stop doing business with North Korea. That's why you've seen a number of other countries pull their embassies out of North Korea. And you're finally starting, after 40 years, to see some very real movement on the sanctions and the diplomatic front, only because they believe this president will use military force.
I was at the UN reporting for us all last week. Of course, they were shocked. I mean, they were shocked when China came out with that memo telling the central bank, telling the banks not to do business anymore, and that they would start cracking down on this, if you can believe them. Yet, Michael, on the other side of this, you have North Korea escalating this, you know, saying they're going to hit us, saying the president of the United States is mentally deranged, President evil, and all this. Let me play you what Mr. Ri, the foreign minister of North Korea, said also about their capability and what he says they've achieved in terms of putting a hydrogen bomb on top of a missile. Listen.
Recently, the DPRK has successfully conducted ICBM-mountable H-bomb tests as a part of the efforts to achieve the goal of completing the state nuclear force. With this, the DPRK has entered a phase of completing the state nuclear force in accordance with its line of simultaneous development of the economy and the nuclear force.
Well, that's Ri Yong-ho saying they've put, as you heard, a hydrogen bomb basically on top of a missile. That's what we worry about. Do you think he's telling the truth, or it's just another claim?
Well, I think time is not on our side here. The North Korean capability will continue to get more and more sophisticated. They're moving their missiles onto mobile launchers, which means they can move them around, and they're much harder for us to find and take out. They're moving from liquid fuel to solid fuel, which means they can be launched much faster. And they're extending the range. Eventually we're going to see a 3-stage ICBM that can attack anywhere in the world versus right now, which is only the west coast of the United States. So again, time is not on our side. I think more of the same old in terms of diplomatic language and trying to get them back to the table is only going to be used by the North Koreans to buy more time. And from the Chinese perspective, right now, look, this is not their problem. It's a Japanese, South Korean, and American problem, but only with the president really kind of making them believe that we are not going to accept this outcome will the Chinese start to move away from the status quo that's worked in their favor for the last 40 years.
Well, it is very dangerous and a hazardous situation. The Chinese are fearful that they'll get a ton of refugees on their border, but they are, if one is to believe them, finally beginning to take some action. Certainly we hope that it will be
Eric,
enough.
they can do it on their terms, or we can do it on our terms, and the military option is awful. But that's what I'm hoping the Chinese will move forward in a meaningful way, finally.
That is the message to Beijing. Michael Walsh, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks.
Of course.